Good morning, everyone. Welcome to AEI. Good morning one more time. Thanks. The microphone is on and falling. My name is Mackenzie Eaglen. I'm an analyst here at AEI who thinks a lot about some of the issues we're going to be talking about this morning, particularly air power. And it's my great honor and pleasure to launch our Service Secretary series, thanks to Dr. Wilson, who said yes. So now we've pressured her colleagues to say yes and come over as well to follow up since she's taken the lead. Anyway, we are pleased to have the 24th Secretary of the Air Force here this morning at AEI. She has not been to our new headquarters, so we welcome her warmly. You guys are here because you know who she is, so I won't get too into her bio, although I actually will in the first question. But basically, the long and short of it is an Air Force Academy grad, former Air Force officer, long public servant. She and I met originally when she was a member of Congress, and I was a Senate staffer, wife, mother, many other things as well. And now has a pretty big job running a large organization of almost 700,000 people. So thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Good morning. She's had a pretty busy week from Syria to a major allied exercise. So we're even doubly grateful she didn't cancel on us. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to basically run Q&A. She and I are going to chat for a little while, and then we're going to bring you guys in. And how this typically works is these stream live online. We have about 5 times the eyes online as we do even here in the room. So consider your audience vast. As just one quick housekeeping item, we'll be taking questions from you guys, of course, and then as well online. So if you would like to submit a question for consideration, go to slido.com, so SLIDO, and the code is AEI. And that way you can put them in, and they will show up for me right over here on this handy iPad, and we'll pick the best and offer them up for you for our friends who are not here this morning. So I already referenced some of your many and varied works of the past. You are quite an accomplished woman. I left out some other interesting facts, which are that you're a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, you're CEO and ran your own company, head of a major research university. I obviously mentioned member of Congress, but also your work on the National Security Council. So we're going to just start with a sort of a general career question for the aspirational among us. Can you tell us some of the lessons you've learned or truths that you've found that you've brought to your current job to make it more fruitful?
More fruitful?
Successful.
Successful. I would say probably one of the most important things is to be values-driven. So no matter what you're doing, stay true to your values and yourself, particularly if you're pushed sometimes to cross lines. I always had a rule with my staff on the Hill: we stay on the white side of gray. And so I think being driven by values, one of them for me has always been excellence. And excellence doesn't mean perfection. It means that we do the best we can with what we have today to accomplish the mission, which is the second thing, is to be mission-focused. What are we about? What are we trying to achieve? And if you stay focused on that mission, then it tends to focus people and resources on what needs to be done and not on some of the distracting things along the way. And the final is people orientation. The things that I've accomplished in life, I've never, I think back on moments of where you really felt as though, wow, we got that done, or we did something important. What I remember is not so much the accomplishment, but who was there with me. And the people that we're with are what endures. And so those relationships are probably more important. And I, as a young woman, I don't think I really understood that entirely. I was really a lot more focused on the work, and I only noticed later that what the joy was coming from doing it with people I respected and liked.
That's a great point. I was going to ask specifically about, are the microphones working? Can you guys hear me okay? I was going to ask specifically about young people, advice for young people in particular, and I'm glad you got in front of me there. It's amazing how things change as you get older and wiser and your perspective broadens. I often say Washington is a small town, and everybody does know everybody, so I think that's a great point.
But it's also a company town. When I talk to young people, of course, I did come here from being a college president, the best engineering and science school you have never heard of, probably, but South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Only because you guys are smarter than
well,
like me.
it's a great engineering school, but one of the things that I would tell young people is who want to change the world, want to solve big problems, is focus on what you're doing today. Do really well on what you're doing today. And if you do exceptionally well on what you're doing today, doors will open for you. New opportunities will come. But I think it was Admiral McRaven who once said, if you want to change the world, start by making your bed. And maybe it's not your bed, maybe it's your calculus homework, but get that mastered.
The task at hand. I love that. So somewhat to that effect, at a recent congressional hearing, which I was able to tune in, but I missed some of your opening remarks, and members kept referring back to it. And you, in terms of talent management, and thinking about the future and recruiting and retention of airmen and women, of course, and their families, particularly as you're competing with the other services, as you're growing slightly, but so are they. The propensity to serve is steady or falling, and the number of eligible, steady, but still small, right? It's too small for, I think, the military. On any given day, 24 to 30% of our youth are eligible to join even the military in the first place. And you talked a little bit about talent management. At yesterday's hearing in the Senate, the Navy leadership, they were up and they talked also and said, we've been thinking about this for a long time, and actually they sent proposals through the building under the last administration that died a quick death, but I think are still in the bloodstream of the Navy, things about like maternity leave and all kinds of issues. And but the leaders talked yesterday about Goldwater-Nichols reform and changing DOTMA, or the Defense Personnel Management Act for officers in particular. And so the CNO said, more lateral entry, and he listed some other things. So talent management is on the mind of everyone, right? Yeah. Because if you have the best fighting force, you want to keep it that way, right? And if people are your most critical asset and important weapon system, so to speak, this is something forefront of your mind. But you spoke in particular about how the military needs to change the way it promotes itself to women. Yeah. Can you tell us more?
Sure. First of all, the Air Force is not having a problem attracting people to come in, and I tease. My colleagues and I, the service secretaries, we get along really well, and we have breakfast together every other week. In fact, Richard Spencer just walked into my office this morning. We sat down and solved a bunch of the issues, and but the Air Force is not having a problem recruiting. And we're very proud of the fact, and I rib them about the fact that if you ask people, what service are you most likely to advise your son or daughter to go into, number one is the Air Force. And we're proud of that. The Air Force has never drafted anyone because we haven't had to. We have enough volunteers in the entire history of the service. So for us, it's about attracting talent and then keeping and developing that talent. I think there are a couple of things, and I'll get to your question about women. But one of the things I do think we need to think about as services is making it easier to come and go from the service. Yes. You go from active duty to reserves, and making it easier to come back to active duty. And so it's more part-time and full-time. It's actually more difficult than it should be. And there are still some legacies of a prior time about being, doing a scroll with the Congress on moving to the reserves from active, and it's just really too complicated. So I think there are some things that we can make it easier, and that allows people to manage their careers and their lives better and more easily. So if someone gets to the point where they're a major and that major's parent is ailing and they can't deploy right now, but they deal with that and then come back in at a later point, we should make that easier. So it gives flexibility to people to manage their lives and their careers and allows us to keep talent. We just approved a direct commissioning program for cyber operators. We also have reserve and guard cyber, where people use the talents they're developing in industry and use them on the weekends for us. So there are ways that we're doing that, trying to be more flexible. With respect to women, the comment that I made that did get some attention was in response to a question, and I didn't anticipate the question. So it was just an honest answer, I guess, was that I think the way that we talk about military service appeals more to boys than it does to girls. Because we talk about, you just watch one of our commercials or something that's online, it's jets and flying and things that I actually find appealing. But think about this for a second. If everyone in this room just pause for a second and even just close your eyes and think about the most protective person in your life, the person who is going to do anything to keep you safe, who will run into a burning building to get you and get you out. Half of the people in this room are thinking about your moms. You're the protectors. And being a protector is an inherently appealing thing for young women. Your Air Force protects this country. And it's a natural place for women to be. But we don't talk or think about it in that way. And I think perhaps if we did, more girls would see themselves in that role as a very strong protector. And so I think sometimes the way we talk about things matters for who we appeal to.
I would agree, and you certainly struck a chord with the members of Congress. So, and just thinking about it, you and I may not reflect what the average girl might think is very interesting, because I think speed is also pretty cool, and fighters as well. But
I grew up around people with airplanes, so I do find that obviously worked for me.
Right.
But I also understand that we need to the way we think about and talk about things matters.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of communication, actually, so earlier this spring, the Air Force, forgive me for using the wrong terms here, but froze or paused public communications to retrain your public affairs staff. And so this touched everything from reducing media embeds and base visits to interviews of the mid-career, the Air Force leadership outside of this town. So can you speak a little bit about what's going on and the Air Force's health in terms of talking with and relating to not just inside the Beltway, but in this case, particularly outside the Beltway, everyone?
We had a couple of issues with operational security. We try to be very open with the American people about what we're doing and why, but we also have to understand that our adversaries are also reading the public press, and we don't want to tell them things which could compromise an operation or compromise our ability to conduct future operations. So we had several different incidents, and really, a couple of times it's a mistake, but then it's really a training issue. And so we said, all right, let's pause and let's retrain. The issues were more when somebody becomes a commander for the first time, and all of a sudden they go from being just someone who is an operator to someone who's explaining to the outside world what they're doing. And so it was really more at that kind of wing commander level, maybe in some cases a little above that. But we needed to give our force and our new commanders training on how to do this, how to try to be open about what you're doing, but protect operational security. And so that's what we did.
So we spoke recently in your office, and so I'm just a very candid person, so I'll continue our candid discussions here. In my observations, the Air Force has struggled for years. This predates you. We'll pick on all your predecessors. The Air Force has struggled on Capitol Hill in particular for years, not just with its image, sort of broadly speaking, but actually on a real, tangible level in terms of relationships, in terms of trust, in terms of even and how that translates budgetarily, in influence, and et cetera. So it's not a secret. People here would know some of the high-profile scandals like Boeing tanker lease deal and the very hasty and public dismissal of a previous service secretary-in-chief. But there have been smaller ways, too. The base closure round in 2005, that's when I was on the Hill, which was quite difficult. But there was some internal Air Force tension, active and reserve component, the Joint Strike Fighter alternate engine cancellation, the Combat Air Forces redux, the F-22, the F-22, that beloved capability that so many continue to struggle to love. It's been called a hangar queen and many other things. There was a commission that was stood up because Congress didn't think the Air Force could figure out some of its own family issues, so to speak, within the service. U-2, Global Hawk, flip-flop again, the A-10. divestiture. Congress says keep it. Air Force is, right, this ongoing conversation. It goes on, but I won't pain you any further. So these are just some of the examples I've seen. So when you started the job, how did you judge your relationships on the Hill, understanding that I understand they're your stakeholders and your customers? So not trying to speak ill of them, but and what are you doing to help improve overall, which is a large load, the Air Force's reputation?
Let me accept your strategic comment, but I also think that we have two branches of government where one branch proposes a budget and set of programs, and the other appropriates funds and authorizes things. So we could choose any department of government and come up with items of controversy or issues like that. I say that, but I also accept your point that perhaps that as a secretary I have an obligation to fully inform and engage and so forth. I can't tell you what happened before. I can tell you my approach to it, which is to be direct and accessible, to try to be proactive. Obviously, having served for 10 years in the House, I have tremendous empathy for not only how hard it is to get information that's understandable from the Pentagon sometimes, but how little time they have and how few people they have to help them understand things, which means we have to try to be helpful. And so I've, I think, brought that attitude to my service as the Secretary of the Air Force. I think also I've tried to be proactive and straight and try to, no matter what the issue, get a reputation for being both responsive and honest. Probably the best example of having to deal with an awful situation was the Texas shooter. We knew within 12 hours of that event that the shooter was a former airman, and that we had not properly reported his issues while he was in the service to the FBI database. We owned up to it and said, we're going to fix this, and this is what happened, and I was very straight about it. And I think that's just the way you have to be. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other issues and things where we've made some major muscle movements in this proposed budget on accelerating defendable space, restoring the readiness of the force, how we want to do command and control. We've put those proposals forward, and then we have an obligation, and we've been doing this now for 4 or 5 months, up on the Hill, explaining, answering questions, and accepting concerns. That this is a conversation about something we think is the right idea, but we're not omniscient. We understand that there may be different ideas too, and so it's a level of heavy engagement.
Excellent. So looking at the 19 budget, I'm glad you brought that up. The Air Force is a big winner in terms of new research and development dollars. I'm comparing it to enacted appropriations from last year, but aircraft and space procurement are down relative to last year. So not by much, but still, it was a bit surprising. If you look at the Air Force over time, which is what I tend to do, and I want to talk about the modernization of air assets in particular, and you can certainly speak to also as well if you want all of the other work that the Air Force does. But I do want to talk about aircraft, particularly not drone aircraft. So despite being the youngest service, the Air Force is now the oldest. And so a couple years ago when I was looking into this, I don't know if these statistics still hold. It's probably true or close to true. But nonetheless, of the 3 military departments, the Air Force was buying the fewest total number of aircraft, purchasing the fewest types of airplanes, and retiring the most aircraft. So from 2010 to 2015, that 5-year window, the Navy, excluding drones, bought over 1,000 aircraft, and the Air Force bought just 400. So these trend lines are incredibly worrisome, since I know you do many other things as the United States Air Force. I don't want to dismiss that at all, including space, satellite, and cyber as well. But let's look at the fighter and bomber fleet in particular and talk about how you see the health of modernization going forward.
Let me first say that one of the things with procurement and research and development has to do with the color of money, and you know the color of money issue. And the B-21 bomber is still under research, development, test, and evaluation, so there's a huge increase there. Yes. The other part on space systems procurement, we propose to cancel space-based infrared, the missile warnings satellites 7 and 8, and go to next generation infrared, so that moves money from procurement again into research. But with respect to the numbers of aircraft, the procurement budget of the Air Force is actually significantly smaller than the other services. And I think it should be a concern, given the missions and what our responsibilities are. But we have also gone, in the start of the Gulf War, so in 1991, the Air Force had 134 fighter or attack squadrons. Wow. Today, we have 56. And the demand for air power has not gone down. Right. So I think in the wake of sequester, the Air Force cut 10 squadrons and 30,000 people out of the Air Force. At the same time, there was a huge demand for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and there was a significant increase in that area. So that's a huge change that the Air Force was put through as a result of sequester, and a significant drop in the Air Force budget. I think it is that sequester has done more to damage the Air Force than anything our adversaries have done in the last 10 years. Now, at the same time, we have increased, and you accept this, but I'm not sure, accept with an E, that you don't talk about our remotely piloted aircraft. We have increased the numbers of squadrons of remotely piloted aircraft. I think MQ-9s, we have over 300 of them now. So aircraft, we have, I think, about 29 squadrons or something like that. So we actually, so we have a lot of remotely piloted aircraft as well. And I think this gets back to one of the things that is changing in the Air Force generally is we're not really we don't care so much about platforms anymore. We care about capability and what effects we can create. And we recognize that future warfare will be network warfare, and that it's a mix of capabilities brought to bear at speed to overwhelm an adversary before they even know what's going on. So it's space, air, manned, unmanned, connected to ground, to really good command and control. And so it's less platform-centric.
Indeed. And something we've also spoken about in the past, privately, but perhaps you want to weigh in on this publicly as well. So I liked your point that maybe we should be concerned about how small your procurement is relative to other services. And to that point, the Air Force's budget is artificially inflated because you carry money for the intelligence community. It's not, correct me, but it's not really yours. It's basically what we call pass-through money. And it rests in the Air Force for a variety of reasons. I wouldn't pretend to even know what they are. But the numbers are huge, tens of billions of dollars. And you don't really, again, control this money, is my understanding. So policymakers who don't have time, you referenced that earlier, and we know this from your experience and my own, they take a glance at the budget or the bill and they see that the services spend roughly the same amount, so they think you're all pretty healthy or should be. Can you ever get that black budget out of the blue? Do you think it hurts the Air Force politically in making your case for more money because this money's sitting there, but people don't understand how much of it is not going towards the other Air Force priorities?
This year when we presented our budget, we presented what we call our blue budget. It's $156 billion, which is a lot of money. We don't talk about the pass-through anymore, really. And why is it there? It's because primarily it's the National Reconnaissance Office, which until the 1990s was an unacknowledged program hidden in the Air Force, and that was a joint venture between the CIA and the Air Force when it was stood up a long time ago. So there are some people who say, does it really make sense to have that pass-through there anymore? I kind of try to just ignore it and talk about the actual Air Force budget, which is a proposal which is $156 billion this year, and try to make sure that that money is used to restore the readiness of force and cost-effectively modernize. So we also have a really good relationship with the NRO. And I think Betty Sapp would probably say better than at least in the last decade, both directly between the National Reconnaissance Office and Space Command, but also with Air Force headquarters, that we're just moving forward on things. And I guess there was some. When it comes to technology, I'm very agnostic about where it comes from. If it's good technology, we want to use it, and so we've been doing some of that with the NRO and also the other services. Where we're going through our science and technology portfolios. We may end up testing a Navy system on an Air Force aircraft because we can carry a heavier load. And I said, and we did this over breakfast and just said, yeah, we can do that, fine, and just move on. So it's that's kind of where we are.
And I just one follow-up question to that, and I think it's so important, partly because of what you highlighted. It's not equal among the services, and the Air Force, relative to the other services and in certain investment, is disadvantaged. But also, if there's a lack of awareness about how much is passed through, and I'm glad to hear, we're just going to talk about what's blue. But this is still, I think, new then to a lot of the Hill. Yeah. And in the meantime, what's been happening is that Navy leadership has been making its case through not just current leadership, but navalists on Capitol Hill and around town for the Sea-Based Deterrence Fund, basically to pay for the Ohio submarine, the Ohio replacement program, one of the Navy's only leg of the triad through this, gimmicky fund, which is essentially, I call it, I'll say it, you don't have to say it, it's taking money from the Air Force and the Army to pay for, even though you have two legs of the triad. And some of the case that is made is because, well, we all have equal funding, and we should change that golden ratio, so to speak, as defense people call it. So do you feel like now, as you talk about just the 150 or so billion, just relative term, is awareness being raised? Is there understanding that actually you don't have enough to do everything, much less pay for another services like the triad?
Well, I don't think there's. If that conversation is going on the Hill, it's certainly not going on in the Pentagon between the Navy and the Air Force. The Navy and the Air Force understand that the modernization of the nuclear deterrent over the next decade is going to be extremely difficult to fund inside of the existing budgets, and that's true for both of us. And it's particularly true just outside of the 5-year window, and the nation is going to have to decide what it wants to do to fund that nuclear deterrent. And it's been done different ways in the past, and the big challenge is it was kind of all deferred, and now it's all coming due. So we are modernizing two legs of the nuclear deterrent, as well as nuclear command and control and communications, which the Air Force does about 3/4 of that, and then two legs of the triad. I think there is an awareness that we're going to have to decide what we want to do as a nation on recapitalizing the nuclear deterrent. For us, it's the replacement to the Minuteman, and we're moving forward with that development. But the Minuteman still uses 8-inch floppy disks. Still. Yeah.
I thought they retired those last year.
No, we still have those, and we need to replace the air-launched cruise missile, which is so we have the guidance now from the Nuclear Posture Review that says we're going to keep the triad, that it is mutually reinforcing for deterrence. And then the one area that I wish people would spend more time thinking about, and we don't. They always talk about the triad. The piece that I think is also important to focus on is nuclear command, control, and communication, and the aging pieces of that system that will have to be replaced.
Not like a fourth leg, but almost in some ways. There's no triad without it, or no effective one. I agree with you. I'm guilty of that as well. So we'll round out our own discussion here. I just wanted to quickly pivot to what's been in the headlines this week, of course, starting about this time last week with Syria. But I want to go back in time a little bit and talk about the Air Force's role, along with, to a lesser extent, the Navy and the Army. But really, this has been an Air Force-led ISIS eradication, elimination campaign for years, all over the globe. But I want to look at Syria because there was an interesting Washington Post report out this week, and it said, from February through October last year, more than 11,000 buildings in Raqqa were destroyed or damaged. The U.S. bombarded Raqqa with an estimated 20,000 munitions during a 5-month period. That's more than Afghanistan during the entire year last year. That's a lot. The Air Force has been very, very busy. Here are some quotes, though, from residents from the now essentially demolished city. "My city has been liberated, but I can't live in it. Was this devastation and death worth it? We suffered under ISIS, but we're suffering more under American liberation." So it's clear here the Air Force has done its job, tactically and operationally. The enemy has been routed from the city. They've either been pushed out or killed. But so too has, it seems, all the livelihood and all the civilians. So what are about the strategic effects? I know the Air Force thinks about the effects of air power more than just, a weapon on a target, I think, better than others. But it seems an increasingly popular approach to just eliminate terrorists by leveling entire cities that make them unlivable for years, if not decades. Is this a long-term solution? Is this, and if we're getting outside of what you want to talk about, that's okay, but is this the best approach to counterterror?
I think that the Iraqis, supported by a coalition in the air, I think 28 countries, successfully defeated and is destroying ISIS. And we're committed to that mission. War is a terrible thing, but it's not the worst of things. And I hope that the Iraqi people and eventually the people of Syria will be able to return to lives of peace and prosperity and happiness. And we are supporting their desire and willingness to try to fight for that right. It is devastating and destructive. It's also, as we saw in the action in Syria over the weekend, more precise than any military in the history of man. And that's brought to us by space and air power and precision weapons and very brave people. And I'm proud of them.
So last question. The Syria operation last weekend, but more about how it was briefed actually here. So on April 14th, Air Force's Central Command told the press one thing, and 5 days later they had to correct the record a little bit, not just regarding the types of missiles used, but also regarding the role of the F-22 again. So these details are important for a variety of reasons to share with the public what you guys are doing and why you're doing it. But it was also the first combat deployment of the JASSM missiles. So what went wrong? Why all the misinformation or confusion? And there was a lot of lead time and presidential tweeting and previewing and planning and options, et cetera. So just is that just a fluke or?
I wouldn't. First of all, I think I'm glad that they corrected the record as opposed to letting it stand. But I watched the press conference as well, and I think maybe we should cut people a little bit of slack. They are trying to get information out about an operation that happened the night before on a Saturday morning and taking questions from 100 different directions about operational details, and I think they did a pretty good job. And if you get something wrong on a question, like the version of a particular missile or those kind of things, they just correct the record. It's not that big a deal. Mm-hmm. But I thought they did a really good job, and I'm glad they were there.
Great. So I'm going to pivot here to some online viewer questions, and then we will turn to all of you in the room, and we'll walk around. There's a microphone, and so if you'll just share your name and affiliation with Secretary Wilson, that would be terrific. So we'll start here with a question. So the new National Defense Strategy, quite well, talks about competition with a peer competitor. In fact, the Air Force was one of the first to note, actually, we don't even refer to it as near peer anymore, with a particular emphasis on China and Russia. And the Air Force has a unique role with significant leadership responsibility in both theaters, unlike some other services. So in a peer-level conflict, somewhat linked to this new strategy, how much confidence do you have in our sustained access to satellite-based navigation systems and bandwidth that your networks and comms require? And are you happy with the backup systems?
Good question. First of all, the National Defense Strategy does recognize or pivots the United States and recognizes that we've returned to an era of great power competition. And that is a very different focus than just on violent extremism, particularly in the Middle East, and will require a lot of refocusing. With respect to position, navigation, and timing, that has traditionally been the responsibility of the Air Force. Of our 78, as of this weekend, I guess, satellites on orbit, we now, we have, of those 78, 31 are GPS satellites. So we run GPS for the world and have since 1978. It's been since the 90s, since the signal was unencrypted, so anybody can use it. So the Air Force is responsible for the blue dot on your phones and enables now, probably about 70, the estimate I saw was $70 billion worth of commerce because of the GPS signal. So Uber or anything that requires a signal, the ATM machine you get your cash from gets its timing signal off of GPS. New York Stock Exchange gets its timing signal from GPS. So it enables a lot of commerce in addition to enabling navigation. You may have noticed in that briefing they talked about the strike in Syria all happening within 2 minutes of time on target. Wow. That timing has to do with both really good planning and flying, but again, off of satellites. So am I satisfied with, we are worried about China and Russia developing more capabilities to interfere with our satellites. We are moving to GPS 3F. We just led a request for proposal for the next tranche of GPS satellites, which will be more jam resistant. We are also more resilient in space when there are more nodes. So the fact that there are 31 satellites, you only have to have 4 of them in sight at any one time to get a really good indication of your position. If you have 3 in sight, you can get a pretty good location on where you are. So you're on this road. If you have 4, you can tell which lane. I think is probably the best way to describe it. The Air Force and all the services now, we train for having for military missions without communications or military missions without GPS. We have to assume that in a high-end conflict, you're not going to have everything that you have in a permissive environment. So we train for not having access to those things. We also know that having access to those things makes us more effective and more lethal. And so that's why we're accelerating our move to defendable space.
Quick follow-up on the strategy, and then we're going to turn to you in the room. I'll characterize it, and please correct me if you disagree. It's not a shift or a pivot away from the Middle East, but it's trying to find more sustainable, long-term, cheaper, effective ways of prosecuting primarily counter-terror operations in the Middle East. So light attack aircraft, for example, as opposed to sea-based fighters and other capabilities. But Washington as well as anyone, the tyranny of the now is ever present. Mm-hmm. Dealing with the wolf closest to the sled is a constant concern to wake up and deal with the urgent, of course. You're a decision maker. And you're a policymaker, and that's what you have to think about often. Do you think the Air Force and the leader, your peers at the Pentagon, how difficult will it be to force? It's not the leadership in the Pentagon worry about it. It's the leadership elsewhere in town, the policymakers, the civilian policymakers elsewhere. They might agree with the shift to this competition with China and Russia, but if it actually meant something different on the ground, I don't know if they would agree, in terms of Syria or Iraq or Yemen or Somalia or wherever it is. And I'm not even saying that it is a potential consequence, but do you think that you'll have the freedom to do things differently, truly, with counterterrorism, maybe even lesser, to make this shift?
I think there are 2 things. From the Air Force perspective, there are 2 things. One is the importance of our allies and partners as we reduce the amount of effort we're putting against violent extremism, particularly in the Middle East. And I don't know if you noticed it, but earlier this week, and it was publicly reported, the Iraqi Air Force struck a vehicle-borne IED factory with an Iraqi F-16. Think about that for a second. An Iraqi F-16 striking a Syrian and a vehicle-borne IED plant across the border in Syria. Wow. That's a pretty incredible accomplishment for the nation of Iraq. We are pursuing the light attack experiment because light attack aircraft are a great, they cost a lot less to fly. In permissive environments, they're actually very good as for attack, for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So they're a very good aircraft. They're also a good aircraft to be able to train with your partners and allies because they are less expensive and they're less expensive to maintain. So we are going to pursue light attack aircraft with American squadrons, but also encourage allies and partners to look at interoperable aircraft that are within their budget and their ability to support. So we think that there is support for those kinds of strategies here in Washington, and I think there's also in both branches of government a deepening understanding of the significance of the threat, particularly from China and the speed at which they're innovating and developing, and I think that's a concern for all of us.
I want to open it up to all of you. Please raise your hand. Wait for the microphone. Say your name and affiliation. All right, we'll start in the back and then we'll come up front.
Good morning, ma'am. Rachel Karras with Inside the Air Force. So a few months ago, you said that you were embarking on a 2020 review for the fiscal 20 POM and that FIDP. And I think you said that recommendations would be out in mid-March, so it's now mid-April. Can you talk about what those recommendations are?
For the fiscal year 20 budget?
Yeah, I think you called it a zero-based review.
Oh, we did a zero-based review of programs that then will roll into our fiscal year 20 budget submission. I've gotten an initial briefing on it, and they've identified some programs that may end up not being continued. Most of them were smaller programs because one of the things that the big programs get a lot of attention as we develop our budget, but a lot of the smaller programs don't. And by small, I don't, if you're a program less than $25 or $30 million a year, they don't get a lot of attention, and we don't scrub those. So I think we scrubbed almost 1,200 programs, just kind of looking and saying, all right, do we want to continue this? Does it prioritize the things we want? All of that review will be rolled into our fiscal year 20 POM, and the POM is supposed to be, so we're working that over the summer, and we then submit it to the defense to OSD late in the summer. Wow, probably not off the top of my head. No.
We'll go right here.
Hi, ma'am. Pat Hose from Janes. You talked a lot about reforming SMC at the Space Symposium. A major part of SMC is ORS, and I didn't hear anything about potential reforms to ORS. How are you tackling reforms with ORS, and what specifically are you doing to impact the colonels who are making purchasing decisions?
If he were in your office, he'd have to put money in the jar.
Yes,
That was an overly
operationally responsive
acronym-filled
space.
sentence for our viewers who don't know all of that. Could you please explain?
I have a rule in my office. The Air Force has way too many acronyms, and we just confuse people. We confuse ourselves. And when I ask people, what does that mean? ORS means operationally responsive space. But a lot of times people who use them don't even know. So we're trying to stop using as many acronyms.
And you stick to the rule. You make them put money in, don't you?
Yeah, this is a jar. We're going to have a great party at Christmas time. The question had to do with an office. It's based at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. It's called Operationally Responsive Space. They've done a lot of really interesting things, and they're going to be putting our next weather satellite up. Under the Defense Authorization Bill last year, Operationally Responsive Space was renamed to be the Rapid Capabilities Office for Space. General Thompson, the head of Space and Missile Systems Command, wants it to do more than just rename the office. And we really want to look at ways in which operationally responsive space, or the Rapid Capabilities Office, can be part of moving more quickly to defendable space. He wants to put more people in that. It's really a kind of a small operation and connect them more directly with Space and Missile Systems Center in California. He's got some ideas on that. It's really, I have to give General Thompson a lot of credit. We've been doing these iterative deep dives since December, or sprints as he calls them, looking at major issues in acquisition of space systems, how we can manage better as an enterprise, how we can get out of the rigid stovepipes. And we announced some of the structure of that earlier this week, and we will reach initial operating capability in October. And he's done a really good job.
Great. We'll take one question over here.
Thank you. Hi, Secretary Mark Sellinger with Defense Daily. The Pentagon announced on Wednesday that the Air Force has awarded a $928 million contract to Lockheed Martin to develop an air-launched hypersonic strike weapon. I avoided the acronym.
Thank you.
Wondering if you can tell us what you hope to achieve from that program and other hypersonic efforts, and when you think something could be deployed.
Sure. So hypersonic weapon is a weapon that goes faster than Mach 5 or so. This is actually, this is an interesting project. We're using prototyping to go very quickly. The contract is not to build a specific thing. They have a word for it in contracting language, indefinite quantity something, some other acronym. But basically it is to work with Lockheed as the prime to move forward on a prototype system. But this came out of a breakfast discussion with the other service secretaries. There had been an Army project operated through DARPA that the Navy was going to test, but it was too large for the Navy's system, so they were going to have to spend some time to shrink it down. And instead of doing that, Richard Spencer says, do you think you could test this off of a larger Air Force aircraft? And we said, yeah, we think we can do that. And when they started talking to each other, they realized that maybe the Army warhead was actually better than what the Air Force had been working on. And so this is a really good example of collaboration, rapid prototyping, to try to get a new capability faster. It could fail, but that's the point of an experiment and a prototype. We will learn from it and iterate and try to master very fast weapon system. And then we'll see where it goes. We don't have to decide that now. That's the nature of prototyping. It's not a program of record until we do some experimenting, see what we can do. But it is move fast, find the best technology and incorporate it, and prototype and test and see where it goes. So I think it'll be an interesting project to watch. It is a really good example of how having breakfast with each other and just being agnostic about where the best technology comes from can benefit the military.
I believe it's Air Force. We'll go here in the green. I believe it's Air Force General who told me the goal is to fail fast, fail elegantly. It was the term he used, which I believe Capitol Hill will appreciate.
Thank you, and thank you, Secretary. Stacy Ike, I'm with an applied research institute that's standing up in Indiana. General Jean Renuart is working that endeavor, and so we're very interested in the comments you had on technology and innovating quickly and rapidly. Could you talk a little bit about how the Air Force and the rest of the services are reaching out to universities and UARCs and how to get that technology rapidly into the system? Because that's part of the issue, too, is once you get it, it slows down. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. Let me talk in a couple of areas. One is we are in the midst of a year-long review of our science and technology strategy, which is looking both at what are the areas where we need and should invest in research and development, both applied and basic R&D, and then secondly, how do we do that research and development? It's my view, and I'm a little concerned that too much of our research is done internally in government laboratories and not in collaboration with particularly with American universities. And so that may be one of the outcomes of that review is to, particularly in the basic or early applied research, to collaborate more with university-based research. The second question of how do we collaborate with industry and how do we spin innovation on is a really good point, because more research is now done outside of the national security realm than in it. So we have to be looking at how do you spin on developments, not just how do you spin them off. we do that in a couple of ways, but this reorganization at Space and Missile Systems Center is probably a good example. In addition to getting rid of the stovepipes in SMC, we will. That's a buck, right? In the Space and Missile Systems Center,
Pay me later.
we are establishing 2 offices there. One is on innovation, to be out and looking at what's going on in commercial space and bring that back in to the Space and Missile Systems Center to inappropriate places. As if you're a program manager, you got to get your program done. You don't have enough time to be out there and looking at what's going on in other places. The other one is partnerships, allies and partners. And we're more and more partnering with other countries, and in some cases cooperatively with large corporations to bring technology in. So I think there will be multiple ways that universities will be able to work with the Air Force. The final thing I would say is one of the things we lost after sequester in the Air Force was our intern program. And the only way you're really going to get scientists and engineers who are in very short supply to come in as civilians in the Air Force, and half of our employees in the Air Force are not in uniform. They come as civilians every day, is to have an internship program. This summer, we restarted the internship program. This summer, the Air Force will have over 400 college interns, paid interns, 3/4 of them engineers and scientists. And then next year, they're going to be going back to their universities. Those sets of relationships, connections, and projects they worked on for the Air Force. And I think that over time, that'll be a tremendous benefit to the next generation of scientists and engineers.
Why I love spending time with you, Madam Secretary, is you always tell us new things. We did preview this event with the term spark tank, so if you could just briefly, Kevin asks if you could elaborate a little bit on the lessons learned from its first run and what you expect for implementation on the best ideas.
Well, Spark Tank was one of the, we're trying to get more innovation and free up innovation within the service and get people to use their creativity on the job. And we do it. We also do that in concert with universities and industry as well. So Special Operations Command had this thing called SoftWorks. And we took on that idea, and we've set up several. We've got one site in Boston, one in Las Vegas, one here with Virginia Tech. It involves a university, an Air Force base, and a fair amount of innovation. They've done things like the one up in Boston is focused on small companies that are doing work in unmanned aerial vehicles. There was one where they had a competition where bring your drones into a huge warehouse and had a competition. Last drone flying wins. No rules, almost. There was another one where they put out a competition. Special operators go out at high altitude. They very often go into an area with dogs now. But you can't jump from high altitude with a dog because there's no oxygen mask for a dog. You can't go at 30,000 feet. So the competition was design and build small, medium, and large oxygen mask for a dog. And there was they won and the competition qualifies as a federal competition under the federal procurement rules. So now Special Operations Command has, there were a bunch of students who participated in that competition. So we're doing those things. We also do them in the Air Force. Spark Tank was the first one where airmen pitched their ideas and innovations. The one that won was a redesign of the KC-135 instructor position so it's more comfortable for the instructor in the back of the aircraft. It was kind of a neat thing that they just got after it, saw a problem, fixed it. The one that I voted for that didn't win, but was I thought was really cool, was augmented reality for maintainers. So pilots have had heads-up displays for a long time. The idea was, if you are doing tech work, if you're doing maintenance on an engine and you're looking at the tech order and you're trying to line it up and figure out, all right, is it this bolt or is it that bolt? It takes a lot of time. If you have augmented reality and you look at the engine and you can go step by step, and the instructions are overlaid on the engine itself, that reduces the time to maintain and improves the quality of the work. It also is a great teaching tool. I thought that was really cool. So all of these came from airmen, and all of them are getting a little help from AFWERX to move their projects forward to see if we can incorporate them into the flight line of the future. And I just really love it. You know, the airmen we are a very innovative service. We sometimes lose that in our bureaucracy, but I think we are all bicycle mechanics at heart. And liberating a little of that in the Air Force and getting our airmen involved in building the future of the Air Force is what we need to do, and it's also a heck of a lot of fun.
Well, that is the perfect way to end our discussion this morning, is to applaud the airmen and women who are the innovators and who are working hard everywhere, not here, in places like not here at AEI, to take you into the future and keep the rest of us safe. So thank you, Secretary Wilson, for joining us today, and to the airmen you support.
Thank you.